Hi, my name is Jakob Mortensen, and I would like to give you a short introduction to the paper Discrete Element Modeling of Track Ballast Capturing the True Shape of Ballast Stones. An article that has been published in the Journal of Powder Technology, and a research that I conducted with Joachim Pauholt, Emil Hoved, and Jens Walter. So as you might have guessed, in this study we simulate track ballast deformation. And this of course leads to the first question: what is track ballast? So track ballast is defined as a collection of stones positioned underneath the sleepers, and it is used to bear the load of the trains. So whenever a train passes, small deformations occur in the track ballast after heavy cyclic loading induced by the passing trains. And this makes the track ballast deform. And the ballast degrade in terms of stone breakage, densify, and spread. And after a period of time, a highly deformed track ballast results in uneven transportation in terms of undesirable vibrations. And to solve this, maintenance in terms of tamping is performed. Why do we want to study this? There is a global tendency of trains operating at higher velocities, which increases the maintenance expensive since tamping needs to be performed more frequently. Therefore, new ballast types are considered, and it could be different shapes, sizes, or even new materials. And this makes accurate ballast simulations desirable since new ballast types could be studied with few difficulties. As earlier mentioned, the discrete element method is used to simulate the track ballast. DEM is an effective way to simulate motion, interactions, and collisions of a large number of particles. Hence, it is very useful for simulating ballast stones. The particles are treated individually with their own velocity, position, angular velocity, and orientation. And those are evaluated for each simulation time step. Here it is illustrated for particles I and J. The discrete element method is based on Newton's second law, and the forces on all particles are calculated for each time step too. The total force on particle I is illustrated here. Here, Fu is an external body force, mg is the force caused by gravity, Fn and Ft denote the normal and tangential forces between the particles I and J. Fn and Ft are calculated for particle interaction using the tangential stiffness and damping and normal stiffness and tangential damping as illustrated here. And the stiffnesses and damping is described by the Hartz-Mendlin model. Similar equations exist for the total torque on each particle and the displacement of the particles. The ballast is modeled using 4 different methods: spheres, with and without rolling resistance, clumps, and 3D scanned stones. The models differ in computational cost and in representation of the real situation. So the spheres is the least representational model and is used as a benchmark since it is frequently used in the literature, and it simulates the ballast as spheres with a diameter of 40 millimeters. Regarding the clump model, it is our proposal for an artificially shaped stone complying with the geometry rules for ballast stones, while keeping the number of particles in one clump few to keep the computational cost low. So the clumps are generated from bonding of 10 equally sized spheres. The bonds that are shown in black of the clumps are able to break and will do if the stresses in the bonds exceed the tensile and shear strength of 25 and 40 gigapascals. And there are 19 breakable bonds in total in each clump. Lastly, the ballast is modeled using real ballast stones to obtain the possibility to simulate the rough surface and natural geometry of granite stones. So 10 actual granite stones delivered by Bain Denmark were 3D scanned. And on the right, you see pictures of 2 of the stones. And below, you see the 3D scan output and the DEM particles represented as 15 overlapping spheres fitting the geometry of the scannings. Prior to simulation, the different ballast models are injected into the computational domain. The computational domain is shown up here in the right corner. And here the rails and the sleepers are modeled as stem particles too within the simulation. And down below, we have cropped pictures of the injected particles. Here we have the spheres, the clumps, and the 3D scan stones. In order to obtain a randomly mixed ballast section, the particles are injected with initial velocity in 2 directions, spacing in form of a simple cubic unit cell, and with random orientation. The sizing distribution of the clumps follows the size distribution of the 3D scanned stones. After injection, the ballast is compressed in order to smooth the distribution of particles and to avoid interstices in the ballast. This is shown here for compression of the 3D scanned stones. The compression is performed using a ballast compressor modeled as a wall filling the horizontal cross-sectional area of the simulation domain. The compressor is moved with a downward velocity of 10 to the power of -7 meters per time step. The last step before simulation is to define the cyclic loading induced by the degrades. It is applied by adding an external body force on the rails. The cyclic loading is modeled as a trigonometric load function with a peak of 63 kilonewtons, and each peak models a load of 1 train car passing. Here the load is applied within 0.05 seconds, and it is followed by a similar amount of rest time. And the rest time refers to the time between the rails are unloaded until the next load. Moving on to the simulation results. Here illustrated for the spheres with and without rolling resistance. On the left, we see the computational domain before and after loading. And on the right, we see a plot of the loading versus the vertical deformation. Regarding the spheres without rolling resistance, most of the deformation occurs within the first load cycles. And also we see after simulation that the sleepers are fully submerged into the track ballast. For the spheres with rolling resistance, the deformations are way smaller, but also we see that most of the deformation happens within the first 2 load cycles. The same illustrations are shown here for the ballast model as clumps and as the 3D scan stones. Again, we see that the largest deformation happens within the first load cycles. However, in total, the deformations are much smaller for the clumps and 3D scan stone compared with the spheres. For an example, for the 3D scan stone, we have simulated a total of 122 load cycles. And here only a deformation of 14 millimeters occurs. Here, the different ballast models are compared based on their level of deformation, here illustrated for deformation happening within the first 7 seconds using the same cyclic load. So in general, the ballast model as spheres reaches a higher level of deformation than the clump particles. Again, we observed that the largest amount of deformation occurs within the first load cycles. After the first load cycles, the ballast reaches a state in which the rate of deformation decreases drastically. This state is taken as an indicator of when the sleepers are settled in the ballast. So the noteworthy difference between the spheres and the more complex shaped ballast is the interlocking potential of the complex shape. The complex shapes has the opportunity to lock because of the non-spherical geometry, which the results justify. Another key takeaway is that the ballast model as spheres will deform until the rails reach the track ballast. With spheres, it is not possible to simulate the interlocking potential of real stones, so therefore complex shapes must be used to represent the actual situation. So in conclusion, modeling the track ballast from 3D scanned ballast stones along with representing the sleepers as stem particles is feasible and realistic results are obtainable. From the comparison of the 3D scanned ballast method and the other proposed ballast models, the smallest deformation was obtained in the ballast models from the 3D scannings. We found that the shape of the ballast has a significant influence on the solution, making this an important feature for predicting the ballast deformation. The main finding on this experiment was regarding the concept of interlocking, and interlocking cannot be simulated on ballast model as spheres. Thus, aggregate shapes are needed to obtain realistic simulations. Finally, please have a look on the full paper found by the link in the description box below. And in here, we present more results and a study of the influence of variations of the loading profile. And here we found that the influence of the cycle and rest time had a remarkable influence on the results. Thank you for watching this video.